Hello, today we will be making orange pork chops. We will start simply with a pot. This is the only way to make sauce happen. As such, we will begin with cloves of garlic and a cup of orange juice. It doesn't matter what orange juice, this is just the primary base for the flavor. Now, this might be intimidating to some, but I assure you it's a lot easier than you think. The fact that it's so far just garlic, orange juice, and soy sauce should show you how easy this recipe is if you're only willing to try. The issue with sauce, however, is that it's difficult. Mostly because you have to actually taste it periodically to make sure it's to your liking. And remember, whatever flavor profile this produces, it'll produce a much stronger one after it's been reduced for a while and all the moisture gets out of it. The primary spices here are your standard salt, pepper, and chili powder. This gives it a little bit of a kick, gives it a little bit of texture, and above all, these are also relatively cheap spices that everyone has lying around. I remind you, this is basic cooking for basic guys. You're not here trying to be the next Dane Cook. You're simply here to cook. Now, the pepper sauce is a little bit important purely based on the fact that this will determine how hot this is. So, if you're someone that loves your ghost pepper sauce, throw a couple drops of that in. If you're someone that prefers your wimpy sauces, throw those in here too. It only matters what you personally think is good. Here's a reference point here. I had to put in a couple extra shots because I wasn't satisfied with how hot it was. On top of that, pork is a naturally pretty easy meat, so it'll absorb whatever flavor you do. So you kind of want to make the sauce a little bit more powerful than you would think. Alright, that's about how that needs to be. Now, why honey? The reason for honey is very, very simple. 1, it adds a sweetness. 2, it makes it a little bit thicker as it reduces. And 3, it also makes it so that it clings to the meat a little bit more aggressively when it's cooking. That's part of the reason why it also has a very pretty color. Alright, the sauce is about where we need it to be, but it still needs a little bit more honey. The deal is, when you're tasting this, you want the heat on the front of your tongue and the sweetness on the back of it. Wait, scratch that, reverse it. You want the sweetness on the front and the spice on the back. That's how you know it has a complex enough flavor that once you cook it, you'll actually have something unique rather than something simple or something boring. And remember, even if you're just cooking for yourself, it's important to take care of yourself. You're the only you've got. So, we have our pork chops here. We're going to add salt. We're going to add pepper. And finally, the ever-classic chili powder. But that's not enough. Remember, we're trying to make this good. Our goal here is borderline Chinese food, and we don't have a deep fryer, so we're going to have to make do with 1/4 cup of flour. Now, the reason why it's in the bag is what you're about to see. You see, you can't just stir it, and we're not just coating it because we're not trying to deep fry or pan fry it, we're just trying to get a crust. But first, we need some jalapenos, because jalapenos make everything better. Now, you're probably asking, why aren't we putting these in the sauce? Well, it's very simple. It's a better plate presentation when you cook them in the skillet before you sauce it, rather than waiting for them to get completely shriveled in a boiling pot. So this is more a stage presentation. It'll taste the same whether you put them in the sauce pot or in the bag for the flour. Just depends on what you want. And now we shake it. As you can see in the background there, we have our sauce pot doing its thing on medium heat. And we just want to shake that until it's nice and evenly coated. We're not trying to deep fry it. We're not trying to make a full crust here. We're just trying to give it a little bit of dimension. And above all, give it something to brown to. So, we have our pan of hot olive oil. And we're just going to go ahead and dump our lightly breaded bag in. And what you're going to want to do here is just flatten it out. You want it as evenly across your entire pan as humanly possible. And once this is done, we now enter the boring part of cooking, which is the actual cooking process, where we will proceed to sit here and periodically count to 100 before we bother lightly flipping things over to check to see if they're at the right stage of brownness. And since we've already breaded them, we don't actually have to season them in the slightest during this process. There was a little sneak peek of what our sauce is doing. The deal is you can have these things running simultaneously purely based on the fact that the entire point of what the sauce is doing right now is reducing. It's not actually cooking. It's ready to go as is. This is just getting the meat up to speed with the sauce. So we'll leave that here and keep going. But you see what I mean with the jalapenos in there. It does make it look a little bit better throughout this process. And it also means that no one can say that you don't have any green with your meal, because apparently people have decided that that's important. Like I said, this is the boring part of the process, where we simply sit here and wait. But still, at the very least, it smells very good in here. And part of the reason of why I recommend using olive oil for something like this is very, very simple, because olive oil produces less smoke. And when you're cooking in a tiny apartment like mine, that's something you worry about very often. Ah, excellent. So once it gets nice and browned, you go ahead and you flip it over and do the same on the other side. Not too complex a process. You can see there it's a little bit more brown than what it would look like if we didn't have any of that flour or spices on there. And that also gives an extra thing for the sauce to be absorbed into. Remember, keep Chinese food in mind while you're doing this. As a reference point to how slow this is, I've moved the video up to 3 times speed and it still feels very slow. But alas, I also need to make sure that everyone watching this has a reference to what it's supposed to look like during the cooking process. Otherwise, I'm doing you all a disservice. Now, at this point in the meal, you're probably getting hungry, which is very reasonable. Excellent, excellent. Okay, our sauce is almost ready for the next step. The deal is you can throw it in there when it's about at half evaporated, or you can just wait till your pork chops are done and finish reducing your sauce in the pan like what I'm going to do. In my mind, that makes the pork a little bit more tender and gives the flavors a little bit more time to meld together and become friends. It's sort of the curse of cooking. Everything is a game of patience. Another thing I feel like I need to address is the fact that you'll notice that I do a lot of protein recipes on this channel, but here's the thing. I know us all well enough to know that most of us are living off of potatoes and rice. So I'm simply trying to develop things that go very well when you throw them on top of rice or a potato. And the fact that this is a relatively low-salt recipe is also convenient for the many of us that are going to be suffering from cholesterol and salt problems. But that's a struggle for a later time. Okay, tasting that, and that is ready for a hit of the sauce. So there's not really any ceremony or pomp to this. You take your bowl of boiling sauce, and you add it. Beautiful. Let me tell you, the smell of this steam hitting you makes this entire process feel worthwhile. Ah, yeah, just look at that go. Now, for the rest of this process, we're more or less just waiting for the sauce to be sufficiently reduced. And sufficiently reduced in this situation means all of the pieces are covered, there's very little excess moisture, and it basically just looks like something you would get at a Panda Bowl. You know what I mean? It's meat covered in sauce with a slight breading. Nothing complicated, nothing overzealous, just easy, very good food. Beautiful. And remember, guys, ladies love a guy that can cook. However, I would not recommend drinking while cooking like I do, purely based on the fact that drinking while cooking just makes you hungrier for the entire process. Alright, we're almost at the end game here. You see how when you stir it, the sauce clings to itself and clings to the meat. It doesn't try to just fill the bottom of the pan like a liquid. That's how you know it's just about perfect in the reduction department. All right, let's try another chunk of this to make sure we got it right. Ah, yeah, that'll do it. Throw that sucker on a bed of rice, and you got yourself a darn good meal. Yep, just toss it a few more times to make sure it's all coated. Turn off your heat. Snack a little bit more just because this is a very, very hungering process. And that's about as good as we could ask for. Anywho, that pretty much marks the finish line. I'm glad I got to spend this time with all of you. I wish you well, and have a good day.